Joining us on the Romeo Report now is a Canadian singer-songwriter, Juno winner, who will be at the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre in St. Catharines, December the 22nd. Hawksley Workman is here. How are you doing?
Good. Great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you here. I was going to ask, you've done a lot in your career, 20 albums since 1998 that you've done. Has the pandemic, you've been kind of stuck. We've all been stuck. Has it made you take a look at the world and inspired you to possibly doing some new material?
You know what? To be completely honest with you, I mean, I had a lot of creative energy through the pandemic, but not necessarily for songwriting. You know, we came up with this fun online show called Hawksley Night in Canada. I quit drinking, so for 2 years I've been sober now. I lost a bunch of weight. It was kind of funny because I've been on the road for 23 years.
Wow.
And then then when I'm forced to stay home for 2 years, I get really healthy and really happy, which isn't to say that I'm not missing my work. I am, but I think that had I not had the pandemic to really take stock of my health, and I know it sounds boring and so not rock and roll to talk like this, but it really is true that I've had a great pandemic. I've practiced a lot. I really wanted to come out of the pandemic being better at my job, honestly, than what I went in. But, I've written a ton of music. I've moved to Peterborough, Ontario from Montreal, and I've been meeting a lot of the young, local, hip music kids, and I'm writing with them a lot every week. I have a steady stream of kids that come through and we write, and it's nice to be around young people. And it's just nice to be in a studio with other people again, face to face, which of course we had talked before cameras were rolling about how we're still here on Zoom here together. But for the most part, I planned a lot of stuff, but didn't write specifically. Like, I know that there were people out there who were writing records, but it was more a time of reflection, I think.
Now, one cool thing that you did, obviously you couldn't perform in front of audiences at the big time of the COVID-19. You did the Hawksley Night in Canada. Tell us a little bit about that, because that was a real cool idea.
Thank you. Well, Bob, I had a talk show on my local cable network when I was in high school. I love TV, and I especially love local media. Like, as the world gets more and more online and we get more and more globalized, I actually get more and more excited about really localized media. So when it did become obvious that we weren't going to be touring anytime soon, I had a dream to sort of reinvigorate my old TV show idea. It wasn't, my show in high school was a bit madcap and ridiculous because I was in high school, and the whole idea was I'm going to be on TV making more or less an ass of myself with my pals, But I thought, well, I could do that again. And so I bought a bunch of equipment. I was really lucky to have companies that were still shipping film and video and audio equipment. I bought cameras and lighting and really just thought it through. And I really got excited about making this show. And so Hawksley Night in Canada was kind of like Pee-wee's Playhouse meets Tommy Hunter. And there's gags and fun stuff, and I would write a song about somebody's pet for every episode. We had a proper landline phone-in segment to every show, which was really blowing people's minds, again, because we are so technological. The whole idea that you could call a landline and I would pick up and we could talk was it's almost like it was like re-envisioned as something miraculous. So Hawksley Night in Canada saved me spiritually. It helped me kind of keep the financial, car on the road through that. But it was a real, that was a real breakthrough and a real beautiful time. It was also because my wife manages me, and it was just the two of us. She ran the whole behind the scenes stuff, which, she had never done. And so she's working a camera switcher and she's running lights. And so it's like, we had a sort of a small semi-professional production in place, and it was wonderful.
Now, as a singer-songwriter, people normally think singer-songwriter, guitar player, piano player.
Right.
They don't think of drums, but that's really where you started. Tell us about the drums that just caught your ear.
Well, I mean, I was one of those lucky kids who had a dad who loved music, and in particular, my dad was a great drummer and had been playing since he was a kid. We had a drum set in the house from as early as I can remember. And my dad also just loved buying and listening to records, vinyl records. Fridays, he'd come home from work with a load of vinyl under his arm. And my brother and my dad and I would, every weekend, we would sit and play the drums to all those new albums.
Wow.
And so if my dad was playing the drums, my brother and I were watching it. If my brother was playing, my dad and I were watching. And so we'd take turns playing. And we would literally take, a 45 and just keep putting it back to the beginning and letting the other guy try it. So we would watch it. It was, when you're in your own house when you're a kid, it all seems normal to you. But I think now that I'm an adult, I don't play nearly the same amount of music in my house that I grew up with. My dad was playing music from the minute we woke up till we went to bed. And, it sort of seemed normal, and he loved to blast it. And he had great taste too. And he stayed very current musically too, well into his 40s, into his 50s. And so he was bringing home new music and bringing new music into the household. So that's really how the drumming thing started. It caught on for me at around 10. I really made the decision that this was it. And I started to practice, minimum 2-3 hours a day, and through the summers 4 or 5 hours a day. And I was really actively chasing becoming a great drummer. I was really lucky, or just maybe bizarrely wired for a kid. But I look back and think about that kid and think, what the heck were you thinking? I don't have nearly the same kind of focus. Something happened. And I am so grateful that I put in that time as a kid. But the drums are still a passion. I just released a side project with a buddy of mine, Kevin Bright, the Bright Workman album, where I played drums on this record with Kevin, who's a phenomenal guitar player. And drums are still home. It's still the instrument I'm best at. It's still the instrument that I feel like I can, if I went thrown into a band situation and really want to I can drive the energy. It's an exciting. Every kid wants to play drums too. It's wild and animalistic and kind of rowdy.
Make the most noise you can.
Even that, I think about what it must have been like living in a house with me playing the drums that many hours a day. And quite honestly, I couldn't tolerate that if I had a kid who wanted to do that. I just wouldn't be able to deal with it. It was a lot. I know my parents were run ragged by it. I know that there was days where I would bargain. The drums were in the same room as the TV set in the basement. And I'd bargain. I'd sit at the drum set and watch TV. And I'd bargain with my parents that I could practice during the commercials, which my younger brother just hated, But that's how close it was. The family, they would just, we'd be watching Cheers or something, and the commercials would come, and they'd plug their ears like this. And I'd just play as hard as I could for 3 commercials. It's so ridiculous.
Awesome. Now, who were some of the artists that inspired a young Hawksley? What kind of music were you in and you said, you know what, I think that's for me?
Yeah. Well, my dad's influence was really big in the early days. He loved Stevie Wonder, Elton John, a lot of Motown music. And then when I started buying my own records, Michael Jackson, of course, the Thriller album, 1982, changed my life. I wanted to be Michael Jackson, just like everybody wanted to be Michael Jackson. And of course, Prince was right there as well. Once I was making an allowance and maybe buying a tape or two here at the, here or there at the mall, I really went off on my own and got into 70s rock and roll, which my dad that wasn't his thing. There was no Led Zeppelin in our house, no Who in our house. It was it was a Motown piano singer-songwriter type stuff, very pop oriented. So at 10 or 11, I started to explore Led Zeppelin, and I think I got Led Zeppelin 4 first, of course, and that was just it for me. It was like, wow, I'm done, Fast forward, I went through that whole phase of all the hippie rock and roll music, all the Hendrix, all the Doors, all of that stuff, and was obsessed with it. As my drumming progressed, that was when I got more interested in jazz fusion through the 90s. But also I was more interested in songwriting at the time. I became obsessed with Bruce Cockburn, who I'm still obsessed with. Oh, okay. I loved the Smiths. I loved anything that was really uniquely lyrical. But because I was still, like, on the one hand, I was like starting to formulate this notion that I was going to be a songwriter. But on the other hand, I was still chasing the idea that I was going to be like one of Canada's great drummer for hire kind of characters, who I would move to Toronto and they'd be the drummer on all the albums and the drummer who would go out on the tour with the big artists. So in the 90s, when everybody else kind of was into grunge, I was really into jazz fusion. A lot of Chick Corea on the electric band, a lot of John Scofield. And then in ever since, really, I'm still an 80s music kid.
Me too, yeah. It seems like it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it was, I guess.
It was a long time ago. It was 40 years ago. And, I'll always be that jerk at a party who says, like, it was the last really audacious era of pop music on the radio. I still think there's great pop music on the radio, but, Come On Eileen, Aha, Take On Me, like, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds, anything by Psychedelic Furs. Like, there was just an era where the songwriting on the radio was so great. And I think combined with new technological advancements with synthesizers and drum machines, like, it was just the last time of, like, a phenomenal innovation that was happening. And, I mean, when I'm choosing to put on a record, I probably still will reach for Thomas Dolby or the Smiths or something like that long before I would reach for almost anything else. And it still makes me excited. I was just listening to Tears for Fears in the gym the other day, the first album, The Hurting, top to bottom. And I'm just like, I still get off on it in a huge way.
Yeah. Now, I was going to go back to, we're talking about the 80s and stuff like that. The 90s, I remember getting into your material, working at Sam the Record Man, and it was our choice. Everybody wanted to hear Hawksley Workman. And we played your Christmas album. We probably sold so many copies of that because people are like, who is this? The First Snow of the Year is one of my favorites, and that's 20 years old now. I mean, every time the snow comes, the first snow, I gotta put that on that song, First Snow of the Year. There it is. I can't believe that album is 20 years old, and that's what you're now touring. Tell us about you're on tour supporting that album. It's very exciting.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. 20 years ago, just after 9/11, I had moved to Paris, France, and I had become a little bit famous there all of a sudden. I had a song on the radio, and my video was kind of everywhere. I was also getting my picture taken a lot, and I was obsessed, and it's going to sound totally ridiculous, but I was obsessed with being skinny. And I was like trying to fast and starve myself because I was doing fairly prestigious photo shoots with prestigious photographers through Paris, and I was getting my picture taken a lot, and it was always something I was very uncomfortable with. Anyways, the real thing is that in order to fast, I needed to not be out on the streets of Paris where all that incredible food was lurking, waiting for me to eat it. So I hired a piano, put it in my apartment, and I just started to write every day. And I will also say that the mission was a little bit about reckoning with what had just happened through 9/11, which was, obviously it was a big event for everybody. It's one of those where were you when moments. But it gave me pause even as a young person to think about life in grander terms, I think. And, my grandma was always a special part of my life, and she was still alive then. She made Christmas feel extraordinary. And so I sat in that Parisian apartment and I wrote a Christmas album that would celebrate all the stuff that she loved about Christmas, like the coming and going of the winter birds and the food and the family and the music and
Claire Fontaine, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's so nice to hear you talk about that the people in the store like that record and that you love that First Snow of the Year. I mean, this is one of the most innocent records I ever made, I think. And really, I wrote it in a week. I recorded it in 3 days in Paris. And the record company just said, we can release this. And I believe it was out 6 weeks later. Totally unheard of. That's more like 1950s or 60s, time frames for recording a record and releasing it. I mean, First Snow of the Year, 3 Generations in the Kitchen All at Once, Merry Christmas, I Love You, A House or Maybe a Boat. There's just stuff on that album where I was in a headspace that was a little bit dark, but also quite reflective. And that record just keeps giving back. And it's become, like you said, a record that's important to people if they like to play First Snow of the Year when it's snowing for that first time. Or, you know, Three Generations is another song that just kind of keeps having a life. Almost a Full Moon, about making soup. You know, these were ridiculous songs in a way. I was on a mission to try to pack that album full of words that were completely uncool, like turnips, and you know, it's full of ridiculous words and ridiculous imagery, and it was supposed to be childlike and kind of silly. But man, that record just has a life that is bigger than me now. Like it kind of keeps going, and so every Christmas I get to do some shows that goes back, you know, sometimes we're out west, we do it, sometimes we're out east. You know, obviously we're staying close to home this time. So we get to go to St. Catharines, I think it's December the 22nd.
Yes, December the 22nd in FirstOntario Performing Arts Center. You will be here in St. Catharines.
Beautiful venue. Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
I have a really fond memories of that venue. It's, I mean, really, for a city like St. Catharines, like, it's a world-class place. Like, you could be anywhere in the world. You could be in Budapest or Paris or London or, you know, Madrid, and you'd feel like, oh yeah, this venue it's spectacular. How lucky for a city to have such an extraordinary place to kind of create and have culture together.
Well, we're looking forward to welcoming you to town with the show. Awesome. Thanks very much for doing this, Hawksley. It's great to meet you, and I will definitely have my first snow of the year. Not that I will like driving in it, but I'll have that song ready.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks so much for the interview. Take care of yourself.
It's the first snow of the year. I guess it happens once a year. It's the first snow of the year. Oh, glory! And dogs in the neighborhood are going crazy, and even all the old ones that are usually lazy. It's the first snow of the year. I wonder, will it stay for good?